The wagon wheels had barely stopped turning when Theodore Brennan's mother delivered the words that would shatter her daughter's last hope. "No man will ever want you, child, crying the way you do over every little thing." Thea, to those who knew her well, felt the familiar sting behind her eyes and fought it with everything she had. But the tears came anyway, hot and unstoppable, streaming down her dust-covered cheeks as the August sun beat down on Madisonville, Texas. It was 1872, and she had just turned 22 years old, which her mother reminded her daily was practically ancient for an unmarried woman. "There, you see," her mother's voice carried across the main street, drawing stares from passers-by. "This is exactly what I mean. You cannot control yourself. You are too sensitive for this world, Theodore, too soft for the life of a wife and mother." Thea pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sob that escaped. She had heard these words her whole life, from her mother, from the 3 men who had courted her briefly before deciding she was too emotional, too prone to tears, too much trouble. The last one, Robert Hutchins, had told her father directly that he could not marry a woman who cried when she saw a dead bird on the road, who wept at sunsets, who shed tears over a broken teacup. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving Thea and her mother alone with barely enough money to survive. They had traveled from Missouri to Texas with a distant cousin's family, hoping to start fresh in Madisonville, where her mother had a sister. But even here, in this new place, Thea's reputation had somehow preceded her, or perhaps her mother had made sure everyone knew about her daughter's weakness. "Go fetch water from the well," her mother said sharply, turning away. "And try not to cry about the weight of the bucket." Thea grabbed the wooden bucket and hurried away, her vision blurred by tears she could no longer hold back. She hated herself for crying, hated that she could not seem to stop, hated that every emotion she felt seemed to overflow from her eyes no matter how hard she tried to contain it. She had prayed about it, had tried everything she could think of, but the tears always came. The well sat at the edge of town, near where the buildings gave way to open land that stretched toward the pine forests and rolling hills beyond. Thea was grateful for the relative privacy as she lowered the bucket, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She did not hear the footsteps approaching until a deep voice spoke behind her. "That is a lot of weight for someone so small to be carrying alone." Thea spun around, nearly dropping the bucket. The man standing a few feet away was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms, bare beneath a worn leather vest, were corded with muscle, and his chest strained against a simple cotton shirt. Dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale gray, like storm clouds, and surprisingly gentle as they took in her tear-stained face. I can manage," Thea stammered, trying to wipe her face with her sleeve. The man stepped forward, moving with a grace surprising for someone so large. "I am sure you can," he said quietly, "but that does not mean you should have to." He reached for the bucket, and Thea saw that his hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who had worked hard his whole life. He pulled the full bucket up from the well as though it weighed nothing. "Where are you taking this?" he asked. "The boarding house," Thea said, pointing to the building across the street. "But really, I can carry it. I do not want to trouble you. No trouble." He lifted the bucket easily in one hand. "I am Tobias Zimmerman. I just came down from the mountains to trade some pelts." "Theodore Brennan," she said softly. "Thea." They walked in silence toward the boarding house, and Thea was acutely aware of the stares they were getting. Tobias seemed not to notice or care. He set the bucket down gently on the boarding house porch. "Thank you," Thea said, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away. She could feel fresh tears threatening, though she could not have said exactly why. Gratitude, perhaps, or the simple kindness of a stranger, or just the overwhelming weight of her own inadequacy. "You are crying again," Tobias said, not unkindly. "I am sorry." The words came out broken. "I know it is foolish. I know I should stop. I just cannot seem to help it." She expected him to make an excuse and leave, the way everyone else always did. Instead, Tobias reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. "My mother used to cry a lot," he said, as Thea took the cloth with trembling fingers. "My father died when I was young, and she cried for years after. Not every day, but often. She felt things deeply. She told me once that her tears were not weakness, they were proof she was alive and still able to feel. She said the world would be a colder place if no one cried." Thea looked up at him, stunned. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. "She sounds like she was a wonderful person," Thea whispered. "She was." Tobias's expression softened. "She passed 5 years ago. I think about her every day. I am so sorry." Fresh tears spilled down Thea's cheeks, and she pressed his handkerchief to her face. "See, this is what I mean. I cry about everything. A stranger tells me his mother died and I fall apart." "That is called compassion," Tobias said firmly. "There is nothing wrong with that." Before Thea could respond, her mother's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Theodore, what are you doing standing there sobbing in public? And who is this man?" Thea's mother swept onto the porch, her face tight with disapproval. Tobias straightened to his full impressive height. "Tobias Zimmerman, madam. I was just helping your daughter with the water." "How very kind." Her mother's tone suggested it was anything but. "Theodore, get inside. I am sure Mr. Zimmerman has better things to do than watch you cry." Thea fled inside, humiliation burning through her. Through the window, she could hear her mother speaking to Tobias, though she could not make out all the words. She caught enough, though, prone to tears. Overly sensitive, burden, unmarriageable. Thea sank onto her cot and buried her face in her hands, Tobias's handkerchief still clutched in her fingers. She had been foolish to think, even for a moment, that someone might understand. Now this kind stranger knew exactly what everyone else in the world seemed to know, that she was broken. Too emotional, too weak to be anyone's wife. She did not expect to see Tobias Zimmerman again. Men like him, strong and capable mountain men who survived on their own in the wilderness, did not waste time on weeping women who could not control their emotions. But the next morning, when Thea went to the well again, Tobias was waiting there. "Good morning," he said, as though it was the most natural thing in the world for him to be standing there. "Good morning," Thea replied, surprised. "I thought you would have returned to the mountains by now. I have some business in town that will take a few more days." He took the bucket from her hands. "I will help you with this." They fell into a pattern over the next 3 days. Every morning and evening, Tobias would be at the well, waiting to help Thea carry water. They talked as they walked, and Thea found herself opening up to him in ways she had never opened up to anyone. She told him about her father's death, about the move to Texas, about her failed courtships and her mother's constant criticism. "She is not wrong, though," Thea said on the 4th evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching the sun set. "I do cry too much. I cannot help it. The other day I cried because I saw a mother cat with her kittens. They were just so sweet, and I was so happy to see them safe, and the tears just came. What kind of person cries from happiness? The kind of person who appreciates beauty and life," Tobias said. His gray eyes were warm as he looked at her. "Thea, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I have spent the last 10 years alone in the mountains. I come to town maybe 3 or 4 times a year to trade and stock up on supplies. I have met a lot of people in these towns, hard people, mean people, people who have let the harshness of this life turn them cold inside. He paused, his gaze intense. You are not like that. You have stayed soft in a hard world, and that is not a weakness. That is strength. It does not feel like strength, Thea whispered. It feels like I am broken. You are not broken. Tobias reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch sent a shiver through her entire body. You are perfect exactly as you are. Thea could not speak. She looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her heart race, admiration, perhaps, or something even deeper. I have to go back to the mountains tomorrow, Tobias said quietly. But I want to ask you something first, and you can say no. I will not be offended or angry if you do. What is it? Come with me. Thea's breath caught in her throat. What? Come with me to the mountains. Tobias took her hand, his large palm warm and rough against her smaller, softer one. I have a cabin about 30 miles from here, up in the hills. It is a good cabin, solid and safe. I have a life there. I hunt, I trap, I trade. It is not easy, but it is peaceful, and I would like to share it with you. You barely know me, Thea said, her mind spinning. We have only spent a few days together. I know enough, Tobias said firmly. I know you are kind and compassionate. I know you feel deeply and care about things. I know you make me want to be in town instead of running back to my solitude. That is more than I have felt about anyone in 10 years, Thea. But I cry all the time, Thea said desperately. You have seen that. It will drive you mad eventually. That is what everyone says. Tobias squeezed her hand. Then let me make you a promise right now. If you come with me, if you agree to be my wife, I promise I will spend every day of my life trying to dry every tear you ever shed. Not because I think you should not cry, but because I want to be there for every tear, to comfort you and hold you and help you through whatever makes you sad or happy or overwhelmed. I want to be the one who catches your tears. Thea was crying openly now, but for the first time in her life, she did not feel ashamed of it. Do you really mean that? I have never meant anything more in my entire life. Yes, Thea breathed. Yes, I will come with you. I will marry you. Tobias pulled her into his arms, and Thea felt the strength of him surrounding her, protecting her. He was warm and solid, and when he held her, she felt safe in a way she had never felt before. Tomorrow might be too soon, Tobias said after a moment. We should do this properly. I will speak to your mother, and we can have the Reverend marry us here in town before we leave. Thea pulled back slightly, reality crashing back in. My mother will never agree to this. She thinks I am unmarriageable. She will say you are making a mistake. I am 32 years old, Tobias said calmly. I do not need anyone's permission to marry you, but I will ask for her blessing out of respect. If she refuses, we will marry anyway. The conversation with Thea's mother went exactly as Thea had predicted. When Tobias formally requested permission to marry her daughter, Mrs. Brennan laughed in his face. You clearly do not know what you are getting yourself into, Mr. Zimmerman, she said coldly. My daughter is utterly unsuited to be any man's wife. She cries constantly. She is weak and overly emotional. She will be a burden to you. With all due respect, madam, Tobias said, his voice low and controlled. I believe you are wrong about your daughter. I have seen nothing but kindness and strength in her. And whether you give your blessing or not, I intend to marry her tomorrow. Mrs. Brennan's face flushed red. Then you are a fool. Do not come crying to me when you realize your mistake. I would not dream of it, Tobias said evenly. He turned to Thea, who was crying quietly in the corner. Pack your things, Thea. Tomorrow we start our new life. That night, Thea lay awake in the dark, her heart racing. She was terrified and excited and overwhelmed all at once. She was leaving everything she knew to go into the mountains with a man she had met less than a week ago. It was reckless and impulsive, and her mother's words echoed in her head that she was making a mistake, that Tobias would regret this, that her tears would drive him away just like they had driven everyone else away. But when morning came and she saw Tobias waiting outside the boarding house, tall and strong in the early light, all her doubts faded. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made her feel like she was the only person in the world who mattered. The Reverend Miller married them in the small church at the edge of town. There were no guests, except for a few curious townspeople who had heard about the mountain man marrying the crying girl. Thea wore her best dress, a simple blue calico that had been her mother's before her mother had outgrown it. Tobias wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard, though his hair still fell long past his shoulders. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Tobias kissed her gently, and Thea felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were tears of joy, of hope, of something that felt almost like relief. "I am sorry," she whispered against his lips. "I know I am crying again." "Do not apologize," Tobias murmured back. "I told you I am going to dry every tear you ever shed. That starts now." They left Madisonville that afternoon on Tobias's horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Rusty. Thea sat in front of Tobias, his arms around her as he held the reins, and she felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. Her mother had not come to see them off, which hurt, but Thea tried not to think about it. She was starting a new life now with a man who accepted her exactly as she was. The ride to Tobias's cabin took most of the day. They traveled north and west, into the hills where the pine trees grew thick and the air smelled of resin and earth. Tobias told her about the land as they rode, pointing out landmarks and telling her which streams had the best water and where he usually hunted deer. "It is isolated," he warned her again. "The nearest neighbor is about 10 miles away, and we will not see many people except when we come to town to trade." "Are you sure you are ready for that?" "I am sure," Thea said. "I think I need the quiet. The world has always felt too loud to me." Tobias tightened his arms around her. "Then I think you will like it in the mountains." The cabin appeared as they crested a ridge just as the sun was beginning to set. It was larger than Thea had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The clearing around it had been carefully maintained, with a small garden plot, a shed for storing wood, and a creek running nearby. "It is beautiful," Thea breathed. "It will be even more beautiful now that you are here," Tobias said softly. He helped her down from the horse and carried her bags inside. The interior of the cabin was simple but well made. There was one large room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, a good iron stove for cooking, and shelves lined with supplies. A separate smaller room in the back held a large bed covered with furs and quilts. "I built most of this myself over the years," Tobias explained as Thea looked around. "I know it is not fancy, but it is solid. It will keep us warm in winter and cool in summer." "It is perfect," Thea said honestly. She turned to face him, suddenly nervous. They were married now, alone together, and she realized she knew very little about what that actually meant. Her mother had never spoken to her about what happened between a husband and wife, except to say that it was a woman's duty to submit. Tobias seemed to sense her nervousness. He crossed the room and took both her hands in his. "Thea, I know this is all happening very fast. I do not want you to feel pressured or afraid. We have the rest of our lives together. There is no rush." "I am not afraid," Thea said, and she realized it was true. She was nervous, yes, but not afraid, not with Tobias. "I trust you." Something flickered in Tobias's gray eyes, emotion, desire, tenderness all mixed together. "I will never hurt you," he said. "That is a promise I make right now. along with the promise to dry your tears. I will protect you, provide for you, and cherish you every single day of our lives together. Thea felt the tears coming again, but this time she did not try to fight them. I promise to be the best wife I can be, she whispered. Even if I cry too much. Especially because you cry, Tobias corrected gently. He pulled her close, and Thea rested her head against his broad chest, hearing the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Your tears are part of who you are, Thea. I do not want you to change that. I just want to be here with you. That night, Tobias was patient and gentle with her, teaching her without words what it meant to be husband and wife. When Thea cried from nervousness, from emotion, from the overwhelming intimacy of it all, Tobias kissed away her tears and held her close, murmuring reassurances, until she relaxed in his arms. And later, when different tears came, tears of unexpected pleasure and connection, he smiled and kissed those away too, keeping his promise. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness and adjustment. Thea learned the rhythms of mountain life, waking with the sun, tending the garden, preparing meals, keeping the cabin clean. Tobias taught her to fish in the creek and to recognize animal tracks. He showed her where the wild berries grew and which plants were good for cooking or medicine. And Thea cried, as she always had. She cried when she saw the beauty of the sunrise through the pine trees. She cried when a rabbit Tobias had hunted for dinner reminded her of a pet she had had as a child. She cried when she burned the bread, and when Tobias brought her wildflowers, and when thunderstorms rolled through the mountains. But Tobias never complained. He never told her to stop or made her feel foolish. Instead, he simply kept his promise. Every time she cried, he was there holding her, comforting her, drying her tears with his hands or his handkerchief, or sometimes just with his presence. You ever get tired of it? Thea asked him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. Of me crying so much? Tobias considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. I have spent 10 years alone in these mountains, Thea. 10 years of silence and solitude. Your tears remind me that I am not alone anymore, that I have someone to care for and protect. How could I ever get tired of that? Everyone else did, Thea said quietly. Then everyone else was a fool. Tobias pulled her close against his side. Besides, you do not just cry when you are sad. You cry when you are happy, when you are moved by something beautiful, when you feel compassion for others. Those tears tell me you are fully alive, fully present in every moment. That is a gift. Thea turned to look up at him, this mountain man who had seen something in her that no one else had been able to see. I love you, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I know we have only been married a few weeks, but I love you, Tobias. Tobias's face softened, and he cupped her cheek with his large, calloused hand. I love you too, he said. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you crying at the well, trying so hard to be strong when you were already the strongest person I had ever met. They made love that night under the quilts, with the mountain breeze coming through the window and the sound of the creek babbling in the distance. And when Thea cried because she could not help it, because the emotion was too big to contain, Tobias kissed her tears and whispered that he loved her, that she was perfect, that he would never let her go. The seasons changed, and fall came to the mountains in a blaze of gold and red. Tobias taught Thea to preserve meat and vegetables for the winter. They worked side by side, and Thea discovered that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. She could chop wood, haul water, and skin rabbits. Her hands grew calloused and her arms grew stronger, but she still cried. She cried when the first snow fell in November, covering the world in pristine white. She cried when they roasted chestnuts over the fire on Christmas Eve. She cried when she realized that she had not had her monthly bleeding in almost 2 months and understood what that meant. "I am going to have a baby," she told Tobias one morning in January, tears streaming down her face as she had known they would. Tobias swept her up in his arms, laughing with joy. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. He spun her around the cabin, and when he set her down, he was grinning wider than she had ever seen him grin. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Thea asked through her tears. "Happy?" Tobias pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Thea, I am more than happy. I am blessed. We are going to have a child who will have your compassion and kindness and your ability to feel deeply." "Or your strength and courage," Thea said. "Maybe both," Tobias said, kissing her forehead, "but definitely your heart." The pregnancy was not easy for Thea. She was sick in the mornings, exhausted in the afternoons, and emotional in ways that made even her usual crying seem mild by comparison. She cried about everything and nothing: about the snow melting, about running out of sugar, about Tobias being too good to her, about her feet swelling, about the baby moving inside her. And true to his word, Tobias dried every tear. He rubbed her feet when they ached, held her hair back when she was sick, brought her water in the middle of the night when she was thirsty, and told her over and over that she was beautiful, that she was strong, that she was going to be an amazing mother. When spring came, they made the trip to town so Tobias could trade and stock up on supplies before the baby came. Madisonville looked the same as it had when Thea left it 9 months earlier, but Thea felt like a completely different person. She walked through town with her head held high, one hand resting on her rounded belly, the other tucked into the crook of Tobias's arm. They ran into several people who had known Thea before, and their reactions ranged from surprise to disbelief. The woman who ran the boarding house stopped them on the street. "Thea Brennan, Mrs. Zimmerman," she said, looking Thea up and down. "I heard you had married and moved to the mountains, and now I see you are expecting. How are you managing?" "I am very happy," Thea said simply. "My husband takes excellent care of me." "But surely living so isolated with your delicate nature," the woman lowered her voice. "We all worried you would not adjust well." Tobias's hand tightened on Thea's arm, but she spoke before he could. "My nature is not delicate," she said clearly. "It is sensitive, which is different, and I have adjusted perfectly well because I have a husband who understands that." The woman looked taken aback, but before she could respond, another familiar voice cut through the air. "Theodore." Thea turned to see her mother standing on the boardwalk staring at her. Mrs. Brennan looked older than Thea remembered, more worn down. Her eyes widened when she saw Thea's pregnant belly. "Hello, Mother," Thea said quietly. You are going to have a child." Her mother's voice was strange, almost uncertain. "Yes, in about 2 months." Mrs. Brennan looked at Tobias, then back at Thea. "And you are you well? Is he treating you properly?" "He treats me better than I ever dreamed possible," Thea said. She felt tears starting, but she did not try to stop them. "He loves me exactly as I am, Mother. He does not think I cry too much or that I am too sensitive. He thinks I am strong and brave and worthy of love." Her mother's face crumpled, and suddenly she looked very old and very sad. I only wanted to protect you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought if I could make you stop crying, make you harder, you would not get hurt. This world is cruel to soft-hearted women, Theodore. I know that from experience." "Then maybe the world needs to change," Tobias said quietly. "Not Thea." Mrs. Brennan looked at him for a long moment, then back at her daughter. "I see I was wrong about you, Mr. Zimmerman. You have made my daughter happy. I can see that, even through my own stubbornness. Will you come visit us?" Thea asked, surprising herself. "After the baby is born." I would like our child to know their grandmother." Her mother's eyes filled with tears the first time Thea had ever seen her mother cry. "I would like that very much," she whispered. They talked for a while longer, and though the wounds between Thea and her mother were too deep to heal completely in one conversation, it was a start. When they parted, Thea felt lighter, as though she had set down a weight she had been carrying her whole life. The baby came in early May, on a morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the meadow near the cabin. Thea's labor was long and difficult, and she cried through most of it from pain, from fear, from exhaustion. But Tobias never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her forehead with cool water, and told her how strong she was, how proud he was of her, how much he loved her. When the baby finally came, a red-faced, squalling boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes, Thea cried harder than she had ever cried in her life, but these were tears of pure joy. "He is perfect," she sobbed as Tobias placed the baby in her arms. "He is so perfect." "Just like his mother," Tobias said, his own eyes suspiciously bright. He kissed Thea's forehead, then the baby's. "What should we name him?" They named him Thomas after Thea's father. Thomas Zimmerman, their son, their miracle. He was a healthy baby with a good appetite and strong lungs, and from the very beginning, he was deeply loved. The first few months of motherhood were overwhelming for Thea. She cried when Thomas cried when he smiled, cried when he would not sleep, and cried when he slept too long. She cried from exhaustion and frustration and fierce protective love. But Tobias was there through all of it, taking his share of the nighttime feedings, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, giving Thea time to rest. "You are such a good father," Thea told him one night as she watched him rock their son to sleep. "I knew you would be, but seeing it is even better than I imagined. I had a good example in my own father, even though I lost him young," Tobias said softly, "and I have a good example in you. You are an amazing mother, Thea. Do not let anyone, not even yourself, tell you otherwise." True to her word, Thea's mother came to visit when Thomas was 3 months old. She stayed for a week, and though the relationship between mother and daughter was still complicated, there was a new understanding between them. Mrs. Brennan held her grandson and told Thea stories about her own early days of motherhood, about how hard it had been, how scared she had been. "I cried a lot too when you were a baby," she admitted one evening as they sat together on the porch. "Your father told me to stop, told me I needed to be stronger. So I learned to push it all down, to never let anyone see me cry. I thought I was teaching you strength when I criticized your tears, but I see now I was just passing on my own pain." "I forgive you," Thea said, and she meant it. She understood now that her mother had been doing the best she could with what she had been taught. The years passed in the mountains, marked by the changing seasons and the steady rhythm of their lives. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's strength and his mother's tender heart. When he was 3, Thea gave birth to a daughter they named Tabitha. She had Thea's dark eyes and ready smile, and like her mother, she felt everything deeply. Tobias built an addition onto the cabin to accommodate their growing family. The work was hard, but he seemed to thrive on it. His body remained strong and muscular even as the years added a few more lines to his face and a touch of silver to his long hair. Thea learned and grew too. She became an expert at preserving food, at making medicines from mountain plants, at keeping the household running smoothly. Her hands were no longer soft, and her body bore the marks of childbearing and hard work. But when she looked in the mirror, she liked what she saw: a strong woman, a good mother, a cherished wife. And yes, she still cried. She cried when Thomas caught his first fish. She cried when Tabitha took her first steps. She cried during thunderstorms and at beautiful sunsets, and when Tobias brought her flowers he had picked in the meadow. She cried at joy and at sorrow, at beauty and at pain. But now, her tears were not a source of shame. They were simply part of who she was, accepted and understood by the man who had promised to dry every one of them. When Thomas was 7 and Tabitha was 4, Thea became pregnant again. This time, she was less frightened, more confident. She knew what to expect, knew that Tobias would be there every step of the way, knew that her body was capable of this miracle. The baby came in the middle of winter, during a snowstorm that blanketed the mountains in white. Tobias delivered the baby himself with Thea guiding him, and together they welcomed another son into the world. They named him Timothy, and he completed their family in a way that felt absolutely right. Life in the mountains was not always easy. There were harsh winters when food was scarce, and spring seemed impossibly far away. There were illnesses and injuries and moments of fear. But through it all, Tobias and Thea faced everything together, their love growing deeper with each passing year. Thea's mother visited once or twice a year, and the relationship between them healed slowly but surely. Mrs. Brennan softened as she grew older, allowing herself to show affection for her grandchildren in ways she had never shown Thea. It was bittersweet for Thea to watch, but she chose to be grateful for the relationship her children had with their grandmother rather than dwelling on what she herself had missed. When Thomas turned 12, he began going with Tobias on longer hunting trips, learning the skills he would need to survive in the mountains. Tabitha, at 9, showed a gift for healing and spent hours with Thea learning about herbs and medicines. Little Timothy, at 5, was the wild one, always exploring, always getting into mischief, keeping them all on their toes. Thea sat on the porch one evening in late summer, watching her children play in the clearing before the cabin. Tobias came out and sat beside her, taking her hand in his as he always did. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life is from what I thought it would be," Thea said. "When I was in Madisonville, I thought I would end up alone, unmarried, a burden on my mother forever. I thought there was something wrong with me, something broken that could not be fixed. And now I know I was never broken," Thea said softly. "I was just waiting for someone who could see me clearly." She turned to look at her husband, this mountain man who had changed her entire life with his kindness and understanding. "You kept your promise, you know. All these years, you have dried every tear I have shed." "It has been my honor," Tobias said seriously. "And I will keep doing it for as long as we both live." Thea felt the familiar sting of tears, but she smiled through them. "I love you," she said, "more than I could ever find words to express." "I love you too," Tobias said, pulling her close. "My sensitive, strong, perfect wife." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Their children's laughter rang out across the clearing, and Thea thought about how she used to cry when she saw beautiful sunsets, overwhelmed by their splendor. She was crying now too, but these tears were different. They were tears of gratitude, of contentment, of a happiness so complete it could only spill over through her eyes. And just as he had promised all those years ago at the well in Madisonville, Tobias gently wiped away her tears and held her close, protecting the heart that felt everything so deeply. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, with a kind heart and a steady hand. At 18, he began courting a girl from one of the neighboring homesteads, a sensible young woman named Rebecca who loved the mountains as much as he did. Tabitha blossomed into a beautiful young woman with a gift for healing that drew people from miles around. At 16, She was helping deliver babies and tending to the sick, her mother's daughter in every way. She cried easily too, Thea noticed, with a mixture of concern and pride, but she never seemed ashamed of her tears the way Thea had been at her age. "You taught me that tears are nothing to be ashamed of," Tabitha told her mother one day as they worked together making poultices. "You and Papa. I see how he loves you, how he has always treasured every part of you. That taught me that the right person will love all of me too." Thea hugged her daughter, tears streaming down her face as they so often did. "You are going to make someone very happy someday," she said. "Just like you made Papa happy," Tabitha said, hugging her back. Timothy, at 13, was as wild as ever, but he was also developing into a skilled tracker and hunter. He had Tobias's practical nature combined with Thea's deep empathy for living things, which made for an interesting combination. He would cry when he had to kill an animal, but he understood the necessity of it for their survival. "There is no shame in feeling the weight of taking a life," Tobias told his youngest son. "It means you respect the animal and understand the sacrifice. That is the mark of a good hunter." Thea stood at the window one morning, watching Tobias work with Timothy in the yard, teaching him to maintain his rifle. Her husband was 48 now, his long hair more silver than brown, his beard fully gray. But he was still strong, still vital, still the most handsome man Thea had ever seen. As if sensing her gaze, Tobias looked up and smiled at her, that special smile reserved just for her. After 16 years of marriage, that smile still made her heart race. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Thea and Tobias sat together by the fire. She was mending one of Timothy's shirts, and he was working on a new pair of snowshoes for the coming winter. "You ever miss it?" Thea asked suddenly. "The solitude you had before you met me, the peace and quiet." Tobias set down the snowshoe and looked at her with surprise. "Never," he said firmly. "Not once in 16 years, Thea. Why would you ask that?" "I have just been thinking," Thea said, setting down her mending, "about how your life changed when you married me. You went from peaceful solitude to a house full of noise and chaos and emotions." "I went from loneliness to love," Tobias corrected. He moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. "I went from existing to living. There is a difference, Thea. Before you, I was just surviving, going through the motions. You and our children gave me purpose and joy, even with all my crying." Thea asked, smiling a little. "Especially with all your crying," Tobias said. He leaned in and kissed her softly. "Your tears remind me every single day that we are alive, that we have things worth crying over: beauty and love and family and life. How could I ever miss the emptiness I had before?" Thea rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness, and the creek babbled its eternal song. 2 years later, Thomas married Rebecca in a simple ceremony at their cabin. It was the first wedding any of them had hosted, and Thea cried through the entire thing, tears of joy at seeing her firstborn so happy. Tears of nostalgia for the baby he had been. Tears of gratitude that he had found someone who loved him well. "Your mother is crying again," one of the neighbors remarked to Thomas with a laugh. "She always does," Thomas said, smiling at Thea with pure affection. "It is just how she shows she cares." Rebecca fit into their family beautifully, and within a year, she was pregnant with their first grandchild. Thea cried when they told her the news, and Tobias just laughed and pulled her into his arms. "I should have married a woman who did not cry," he teased gently. "Then I would not have to keep so many handkerchiefs on hand." "You love it and you know it," Thea said, swatting his chest playfully. "I do," Tobias admitted, kissing the top of her head. "I really do." The grandchild, a girl they named Rachel, arrived in late spring. Thea cried the first time she held her granddaughter, overwhelmed by the miracle of new life and the continuation of their family line. Tobias stood beside her, his large hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We did good," he said softly. "We built something beautiful here, Thea." "We did," Thea agreed, smiling through her tears at the baby in her arms. Life continued its steady rhythm. Tabitha eventually married a young doctor who had settled in the area, a man who appreciated her healing gifts and her sensitive nature. Timothy, at 19, was in no hurry to settle down, preferring to explore the mountains and learn everything he could from his father. Thea's mother passed away peacefully in her sleep when Thea was 43. Thea cried for days not just for the loss of her mother, but for the complicated relationship they had had, for the years of misunderstanding, for the healing that had come too late. But she was grateful too, grateful that they had reconciled, that her mother had gotten to know her grandchildren, that the last words between them had been words of love. "She was proud of you," Tobias told Thea as they stood beside the grave. "She told me so the last time she visited. She said she had been wrong about you, that you were stronger than she had ever been." "She was strong in her own way," Thea said quietly. "She just did not know how to show it without hiding her heart." As Thea entered her late 40s, she began to slow down, feeling her age in ways she had not before. Her hands ached sometimes from all the years of hard work, and she tired more easily than she once had. But she was content, surrounded by her family, secure in the love of her husband and children. Tobias aged too, though he remained strong. His face was deeply lined now, his body bearing the scars of decades in the mountains. But to Thea, he was as handsome as the day she had met him at the well in Madisonville. One evening, as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Thea stood and raised her cup. "I want to say something," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. She looked at Tobias, at his gray hair and weathered face and eyes that still looked at her with the same love they had held a quarter-century ago. 25 years ago, I was told I cried too much to ever be anyone's wife. I believed it. I thought I was broken, unlovable, too weak for this world." She paused, tears streaming down her face as they always did. "And then I met a man who promised to dry every tear I ever shed. He has kept that promise every single day for 25 years. He has loved me through every tear, every emotion, every overwhelming feeling. He taught me that my sensitivity was not a weakness but a strength, that my tears were not something to be ashamed of but something to be honored." Thea looked around at her family, her strong sons, her compassionate daughter, her beautiful grandchildren, the partners her children had chosen. "He gave me all of this. He gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. And I want everyone here to know that the best decision I ever made was saying yes when this mountain man asked me to share his life." Tobias stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms as their family cheered and clapped around them. He kissed her deeply, not caring that she was crying, not caring that everyone was watching. "The best decision I ever made was asking you," he murmured against her lips. "You are everything I never knew I needed, Thea. Everything." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed between them. Afterward, Thea lay in Tobias's arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the rise and fall of his chest. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" she asked softly. "After we were married." "I said a lot of things that night," Tobias said, his voice warm with memory. "You said you would protect me, provide for me, and cherish me every day of our lives together," Thea said. "You have done all of that and more, Tobias. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Tobias corrected. He stroked her hair, his touch gentle despite his calloused hands. "You gave me love and family and purpose. You gave me children and grandchildren, and a reason to be something more than just a man alone in the mountains." The years continued their march forward. Grandchildren became toddlers, toddlers became children. Thomas and Rebecca had 3 more children, giving Thea and Tobias a total of 4 grandchildren from their oldest son. Tabitha had 2 daughters with her doctor husband, both of whom showed promise as healers. Timothy finally settled down at 25, marrying a spirited young woman from town who was not afraid of mountain life. Thea was 55 when Tobias fell ill for the first time in their marriage. It started as a cough that would not go away, and by midwinter, he was struggling to breathe properly. Thea nursed him with all the skill she had learned over the years, making teas and poultices, sitting up with him through long nights, praying desperately that he would recover. She cried constantly during those weeks, tears of fear, tears of helplessness, tears of fierce love for this man who meant everything to her. "Do not cry," Tobias wheezed one night, reaching up to touch her face. "I am going to be fine." "You had better be," Thea said fiercely. "Because I am not ready to lose you, Tobias Zimmerman. We have years left together, decades. You promised to dry every tear I ever shed, and I have a lot more tears in me." Tobias laughed weakly at that, which turned into a coughing fit, but there was love in his eyes as he looked at her. "Then I guess I better recover," he said when he could speak again. "Cannot break my promise now," and he did recover, slowly but surely. By spring he was back on his feet, though not quite as strong as he had been before. The illness had aged him, and Thea noticed he tired more easily now. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered. They adapted to this new reality, with Timothy taking on more of the heavy work and Tobias focusing on teaching and guiding rather than doing everything himself. Thea worried about him constantly, but she tried not to let it overwhelm her. "I am not leaving you any time soon," Tobias told her one evening as they sat together on the porch, a blanket wrapped around both of them. "We still have too much living to do." "Promise?" Thea asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "I promise," Tobias said firmly. "Just like I promised 28 years ago to dry every tear you ever shed. I keep my promises, Thea." The seasons turned, bringing new joys and new challenges. They celebrated 30 years of marriage, then 35. Thea was 60 and Tobias was 67 when they became great-grandparents for the first time, Rachel having married and had a son of her own. "Can you believe it?" Thea said, holding the tiny baby and crying tears of joy. "Our granddaughter's son, our great-grandson." "I can believe it," Tobias said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at the baby. "Because we built this, Thea. We created a legacy of love and family, and it is all because a crying woman at a well caught my eye 37 years ago." "I was not crying when you first saw me," Thea protested. "I was just struggling with the water bucket. You were crying when I got close enough to really see you," Tobias said with a smile. "And I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." They settled into the rhythms of old age together, still deeply in love, still companions in everything. Thea's hair had gone completely gray, and her body bore the marks of 60-plus years of life and hard work. But when Tobias looked at her, she still felt beautiful. And she still cried, though perhaps not quite as often as she once had. She cried at weddings and funerals, at births and sunsets, at moments of beauty and moments of sadness. But now, after all these years, her tears were simply part of the fabric of their life together, accepted, understood, cherished. One evening in late autumn when Thea was 62 and Tobias was 69, they sat together on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The air was crisp with the promise of coming winter, and the aspens had turned gold against the dark green of the pines. "I have been thinking," Tobias said quietly, "about that day in Madisonville when I asked you to come with me." "What about it?" Thea asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I told you that day that I had never meant anything more in my life," Tobias said. "And I want you to know that is still true. Every day with you has been a gift, Thea. Every tear, every smile, every moment, all of it has been exactly what I needed." Thea felt tears gathering, but they were good tears, happy tears. "You saved my life," she said softly. "You saw me when no one else did. You loved me when everyone else said I was unlovable. You kept every promise you ever made to me." "Because you were worth every promise," Tobias said. He took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Thea, the absolute best thing." They sat together as darkness fell. Two people who had built a life together against all odds, who had proven that love and understanding could overcome anything, who had created a family and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And when Thea cried, because of course she cried, moved by the beauty of the moment and the depth of her love, Tobias pulled out a handkerchief and gently dried her tears, just as he had been doing for 38 years, just as he would continue to do for as long as they both lived. "I love you," Thea whispered into the gathering darkness. "I love you too," Tobias whispered back. "My beautiful, sensitive, perfect wife, today and always." The stars came out one by one above the mountains, and below them, in the cabin they had built together, the lights of their family glowed warm against the night. It was a good life, Thea thought. A life built on acceptance and love, and the simple promise of a mountain man to dry every tear his wife ever shed. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible on that dusty day in Madisonville, when her mother had declared her unmarriageable. She had been wrong, so wrong. And Tobias had been right. Her tears were not a weakness. They were proof that she was alive, that she felt deeply, that she had the courage to stay soft in a hard world, and she had found the one person who not only understood that but cherished it. As winter settled over the mountains that year, Thea and Tobias remained healthy and content, surrounded by family during the holidays. Their cabin was filled with children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. The noise and chaos and love exactly what they had built over nearly 4 decades together. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Thomas raised his cup in a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "who taught all of us what real love looks like, who showed us that strength comes in many forms and that the greatest strength of all is the courage to be exactly who you are." "To Mama and Papa," everyone echoed, raising their cups. Thea cried, of course, overwhelmed by love for all of these people who had come from the union of a mountain man and a woman who cried too much. And Tobias, as he had done countless times before, gently wiped away her tears and kissed her forehead, keeping his promise even now, even after all these years. They lived many more years together, growing older but never growing apart, their love only deepening with time. And when Thea finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by family, the last thing she felt was Tobias's hand holding hers, his voice whispering that he loved her, that she had been everything to him, that she had made his life complete. Her final tear, a tear of perfect peace and contentment, was dried by the man who had kept his promise for over 45 years. Tobias followed her just 2 years later, at the age of 87, his body finally giving out though his spirit remained strong until the end. His children and grandchildren were with him, and his last words were of Thea, how much he had loved her, how she had been the best decision of his life, how he looked forward to seeing her again. They were buried together on the hillside above their cabin, looking out over the mountains they had both loved. And on their shared headstone, their family had carved a simple inscription. Tobias and Thea Zimmerman, he promised to dry every tear. She taught him that tears were strength. Together, they built a legacy of love. The cabin remained in the family for generations, passed down through Thomas's line, a testament to what two people could build when they chose to love each other completely and without reservation. And the story of the mountain man and the crying girl became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a story about acceptance and love, about the courage to be yourself, and about keeping promises no matter what, because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not that Thea had cried or that others had judged her for it. What mattered was that Tobias had seen past the tears to the person beneath, kind, compassionate, strong in her own way. And he had loved her not despite her tears, but because of them, because they were part of who she was, because they showed that she had the courage to feel deeply in a world that often demanded numbness. Their love story became an inspiration, proving that there was someone for everyone, that the right person would love all of you, that promises kept over a lifetime meant more than any momentary passion. It showed that true strength was not in hiding your emotions, but in having the courage to show them, and that the greatest love stories were not about perfect people, but about imperfect people who chose to love each other perfectly. And so the legacy of Tobias and Thea Zimmerman lived on, carried forward by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom had learned from their example what it meant to truly love someone, to see them clearly, accept them completely, and cherish them always, tears and all.